Should we go ahead and start, or do you think?
I think we're good.
Okay. Um, thank you everyone for coming to week 3 of 4. And we'll get started. To begin with, Don's going to do the first part of the talk on discussion of intersections of Buddhism and Christianity. And then I will move on to a couple of other topics, and we'll close with meditation and discussion like we did last week. So, Don?
The first thing I want to say is that in seeing parallels between Christianity and Buddhism is that we need to respect the authenticity and the uniqueness of each tradition. Sometimes people superficially say, oh, that's the same. The metaphor that I use is that of a tuning fork. If you can remember back to high school physics class, the teacher would take one tuning fork and strike it and hold up another one at the same frequency. And the next thing you know, the other one starts to vibrate as well. There are two separate tuning forks, but there is this parallel vibration, if you will.
Mm.
And one can see that in various ways in the intersection between Buddhism and Christianity. The most striking parallel is that of compassion. There are, I don't know, they're called sutras. There's no exact parallel in Christianity, but they are, as it were, chants to help shape the mind. And when I was living with Zen Buddhists out there in California, every morning we chanted the Heart Sutra. We did it in Japanese. They were very much into giving a Japanese shape to their Buddhist life there. But the chant is to stress the importance of expressing the compassion of the heart. And as I mentioned last week, the two fruits of practice that are stressed in Buddhism are first insight, prajna, often said wisdom. It's not, I prefer the word insight. Having insight into how our mind is out of control, how our mind leads us into unhappiness and conflict, and the need to understand the mind and to shape it in a creative, life-affirming way. But the other is karuna, that is compassion, to learn to have compassion for all things. And what struck me and had me begin to puzzle about all of this, among other things, was the immolation of a Buddhist monk. I think there was only one. Maybe there was more than one. You might remember. But a Buddhist monk who poured gasoline on himself and set himself on fire out of concern for the suffering and the death of so many people in the Vietnamese War. So this Vietnamese monk burned himself alive. Horrible, but precisely to demonstrate the pain of his people and giving himself his life for their sake. Uh, that's pretty powerful. Uh, but paralleling so much of the compassion of so many Christian people, and especially, of course, grounded in Jesus himself, a willingness to endure suffering for the sake of others. But there are other little resonances, and I'd like to tell you one story. It's the calling of Sunita. The Buddha and his disciples were walking along the short banks of the Ganges River when coming in the opposite direction was a man carrying night soil. That's a fancy way of saying human excrement, which was used then and even now as fertilizer in the fields. And he was, of course, as you might, if you understand anything about Hinduism, which is the context out of which Buddhism arose, in the caste system, at the bottom of the pile are the untouchables, the Dalits. And obviously, he was an untouchable. Only an untouchable would have that kind of a job. Anyway, as he approached the Buddha, Buddha called out to him and said, "What is your name?" And he said, "My name is Sunita." He said, "Would you like to join our community?" He said, "Oh no, I'm an untouchable."
Mm.
And the Buddha said, "We have no caste in our community. All are equal. Would you like to be part of our community?" And he said, "Yes." And the Buddha said to one of his disciples, "Go to Ananda. He has an extra robe and bring it here." And so he and another disciple bathed Sunita in the water of the Ganges and put a monastic robe on him and welcomed him into the community of his disciples. And when the Brahmins, that's caste number one, the religious leadership, when the Brahmins heard about it, they said, "This proves he is a false teacher, for he accepts and uh, lives with untouchables."
Wow.
Any resonance?
Yeah.
The calling of Matthew, the response of the Pharisees. The Buddha was even persuaded to accept women into his community. Very radical then, and still radical today, accepting women as equals.
Right.
That degenerated. I remember seeing the nuns, the Buddhist nuns in Thailand. They were the servants of the male monks. So unfortunately, that early egalitarian understanding of things degenerated in Buddhism.
Human nature.
But there you have it, the calling of Sunita,
Mm.
the calling of Matthew, the recognition of a community of life where all were equal and no one was superior to anyone else. That is an example of that resonance and why one can feel comfortable with these strange beings called Buddhists. It remains other, it remains uniquely itself, but one can have a sense of a community of life, a touching of life upon life, because of the commonality of humility, of open-endedness, and of compassion. Um, that's one little taste of that residence.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, any questions for Don before we move on?
Uh, Jainism is has great value for life. I understand. Is that an outgrowth of Buddhism?
Is there what?
Jainism?
Yes, I'm familiar with Jainism.
It's an outgrowth of Buddhism.
No. It has its own origins.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. A couple of just little housekeeping things. First, if you didn't get the handout when you came in, please get one. We'll use that later on in the hour. And second, I wanted to pass something around. As you know from last week, we set up what Buddhism we would call a little shrine for kind of not a worship thing. It's a thing to focus on. And that's the purpose of it. And one of the things I really wanted you to see, most of you can't. So I'm going to pass this around. This is a picture of the primordial Rigdon that I talked about last week. And remember, his situation was he was a ruler, a secular ruler of a society. And the story goes he went to the Buddha and said, I want to follow you, but I'm a king. I can't, become a monk and just go away. I have responsibilities. I have people who need me. Guess that was back in the days when rulers actually cared about that. I digress. Um, but so the Buddha gave a number of teachings to him, it is said, and said as a what was then called a householder, or a person who, like us, just lives life in the world, has jobs, etc. You can still follow the teachings. You can still become awakened. And so the purpose of putting a picture like this on the shrine is to remind us that we have an example. We don't have to be of any special religious order or any kind of rank or anything like that. Ties very closely with the story Don just told. This is a person who was just a person in the world. And that's why he's on the shrine as a reminder of that fact. And so don't let the stylized stuff kind of weird you out a little bit. It's in traditional Tibetan style. It's just the way they do art. So appreciate it for what it is and take a look at his face. I think you'll find that very interesting. And then just pass it around so everyone has a chance to look at it. I also have a statue of the Buddha. Same idea. Remember I told you that many depictions of the Buddha
Well,
and
yeah.
has a picture
Well, you
of
can be, but it's the same thing.
I know, but I can
Judy, could you silence yourself,
can't
please?
see it very well.
I mean, mute yourself, I meant.
the Buddha, it said at the moment of his awakening, of his enlightenment, everyone said, well, how do we know what you're saying is true? He touched the earth and said, the earth itself is my witness. And so you can see here, there's a, depiction of him actually touching the earth. So anyway, enough of that. You can, we'll put the picture back on the shrine when everyone's had a chance to look at it. So today, what we're going to talk about are several different what we call paths of Buddhism. It's not the same thing as denominations. It's not the same thing as you know, cultural or national heritages or anything like that. What it is are just different ways of looking at the past. And we're going to talk about two of them today. The first one is what's called the Hinayana path. Hinayana. And that's best translated as narrow vehicle. It's the, basically, it's the kind of the most orthodox, the most traditional, the earliest form of Buddhism. And the key thing that's very different from Christians and Christian denominations is it's not like you have to choose one or the other. The idea is that, if you're following perhaps a different path primarily, all it is an augmentation and a different perspective on the same thing. If I, am on, say, the Mahayana path, which we'll get to and we'll talk about, that doesn't mean that I abandon Hinayana practices or turn my nose down at people that, it's nothing like that at all. The path is not considered linear. It's not this step one to step two to step three. It's considered more cyclical. In fact, you'll hear a phrase, maybe from any Buddhist friends that you have, they'll talk about the turning of the wheel. And these different teachings are various turnings of the wheel. But again, it's the wheel. You can't just say I'm here and I'm out there because it's circular, it's not linear. So the best way to think of Hinayana Buddhism is it is focused on your own mind and focusing on becoming awakened, focused on dealing with your own neurotic tendencies that you would tend to have, and working on trying to be aware and be, enlightened is a very kind of esoteric kind of word. I prefer awakened because it is basically just saying that we are on a path to just being aware of reality as it is. Now, there are obstacles to that. And what did I say was the one unique quality about Buddhism? I said this in week one. What does Buddhism have a lot of?
Oh no, lists.
Lists, yes. It was because of Buddhism, I think, that they invented PowerPoint. And so here are the obstacles to becoming awakened. And they talk about it in terms of a teacup, or in Western terms, a coffee cup. And um, these obstacles stand for the different ways that you can be blocked from becoming enlightened. The first one is called the leaking cup. Well, you try to drink some tea and cup leaks, you're not going to get very far. That refers to people who listen to teachings but don't bother to remember them. They don't hold on to them. So review, practice. That's very important, as we learn these things. Otherwise, you learn it, next day you forget it. What good did it do you? Um, the that I was joking about the lists, but that's why they have those lists, because it's easy for people, especially back in ancient times when most people were not literate, you couldn't learn. So anyway, the second one is the cup turned upside down. So you're not open to receiving anything. Your mind is like fixed on whatever it is that you believe, and you're not willing to look at anything else. The cup is too full. So what happens when you have a full teacup and you decide, oh, you need more tea here? You know, it spills over. Um, that is a symbol of there's too much going on in your mind to receive something new. It's not that you're refusing, we talked about the teacup turned over. It's just that you've got so much crazy stuff going on in your head. You're so obsessed with work and with your next vacation and with this and with that. You just can't concentrate. The fourth one, drinking from somebody else's cup. So that is kind of similar to what some Westerners do when they take traditions like Buddhism or yoga or something like that and turn it into something to capitalize on. Where, essentially they're, oh, this is weird, this is unique, this has strange pictures like the one you were looking at. Oh, we can make a buck on that. That is, will be an obstacle. And finally, the cup filled with poison. And that's where we take teachings, good teachings, but we twist them to prop up our own ego. For example, I could say, and there's certainly an excellent Christian counterpart to this story, but I could say that I want to, be a really good Buddhist teacher and meditator and student. And, hey, I'm gonna make sure everybody knows that too. I'm gonna say everyone I meet, hi, I'm John. I'm your friendly neighborhood Buddhist, and you know, uh, that's what we're talking about here. We're corrupting the teaching. We're using it to prop up our own ego rather than actually listening to the teachings. And as there are many examples in Christian teaching of the same principle. So we talked about the obstacles. There are also 4 reliances, another list. This is just the advice. First is rely on the teachings, not the teacher. The second, rely on the meaning, not the words. Third, rely on ultimate meaning, not provisional meaning. I'll say just a short thing about that. There's 2 perspectives of truth in Buddhism. One is called relative truth, the other absolute truth. When we say ultimate meaning, we're talking about absolute truth. The truth of emptiness, impermanence, all this kind of thing. The truth of the fact that there is no solid self. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't the self. I'm John, you know me. But ultimately, there is no independent entity called John that exists outside of its context, outside of interdependence. Provisional, or what we call relative truth, is more kind of just that functional stuff that we need to live life and live in society. And that's important too. It's just important to remember not to take it like super seriously. So, as I said, Hinayana Buddhism is the most original form of Buddhism. And one of the things that it does, we focus on our thoughts. The shamatha meditation we did last week is a Hinayana practice because we were focused on our thoughts and we were focused on how our mind is working. We were noticing when we would get distracted or our minds would go wandering on to what we're having for lunch. There's nothing wrong with that. Emotions and thoughts aren't bad. We're not Vulcans, we're not Mr. Spock or anything like that. But what we want to do is be aware of our thoughts and be aware of how our minds work. And the important thing then that this practice gives us is to perceive that there is a gap between stimulus and response. So this is how, we become better at compassion and better at being with other people and being in community. We start to perceive that we have a choice. And we don't have time to go through this, but there's literally in Buddhism a 12-step kind of path between stimulus and response. But relax, I'm not going to go through it. But what we do see though is that we do have that gap, and meditation and working with our minds helps us to perceive that gap. Remember last week when we were meditating, I said, "Oh, I'm thinking." Then let me return back to the breath. That's the gap. And what we're doing is we're becoming aware. The practice of meditation isn't just for the sake of meditation. It's so that we can become aware of how our minds work. And when I'm at work and this person, I told them the process 50 times and they still get it wrong. Oh, I have a gap here. I don't have to explode. I can take a breath and explain it for the 51st time and, keep community. So that's like one small example. So in Buddhism, the initiation to the Hinayana path is something called the refuge vow. And I basically it's a very simple ceremony. You go to usually like a weekend retreat or something like that where you're prepared to take the vow and there's teachings given, you have homework and all that stuff, lots of meditation, and you take the refuge vow, and it's very simple. 3 times you say these 3 phrases, 3 plus 9. So the first one is I take refuge in the Buddha, meaning I take refuge in the teacher. I take refuge in the Dharma, which is the teachings. And I take refuge in the Sangha, which is the community of people that are also walking along the path. And that's what the refuge vow is. Traditionally, when you take the refuge vow, that's formally when you say, I'm a Buddhist. And it's very, very similar, if not identical, in every form of Buddhism. It's that entrance rite. So that's Hinayana Buddhism. Before I go on to Mahayana, any questions?
Is there
Was-
special,
Go ahead.
is there special meaning other than the words that you speak? You've talked about one system and you're going to go to the other.
Uh-huh.
Um, but then the words that describe those two different systems, do they have any special meaning, or does that come out of whatever they?
It's basically just the the original Pali, the original language that, and Buddhism preserves some of those words and phrases. It's like in Christianity. There's the Eucharist. That's not an English word, but we use that, and it's a similar type of thing. Done.
The one qualification is that Hinayana Buddhists prefer the term Theravada, which means the tradition of the elders. Because when I say Hinayana, it's the narrow path, and that can be perceived pejoratively. So they prefer to talk about themselves as Theravada, following the tradition of the elders.
Mhm.
Actually, at the time of following his death, there were many different schools of Buddhism that arose because his final words were, be lamps to yourself. In other words, don't take my word for it, find out for yourself. But I'm passing on to you what I discovered and how it liberated me from this dissatisfaction with life and the suffering that comes along with it, where life is always never a sense of completion or fullness, always moving ahead, wanting more. So we have to learn to just focus and to live here and now wisely. But lamps to yourself. Well, out of that, the one of those schools then became known as Mahayana, the tradition of the elders, the ancestors of the first original community of the Buddhists. And then, when we talk about Mahayana, I'll have a little footnote when John finishes that.
So, oh, yes.
So even though you take refuge to the Buddha, the teacher, you take refuge to the Dharma, the teachings, there is this emphasis on needing to test those teachings with your own experience.
Yes.
Which seems like an interesting, it's an interesting.
Yeah.
Contrast.
Buddha essentially said, don't take my word for it. Your own experience is your best teacher. Does this resonate with you? If it doesn't, find what does.
Hmm.
And you remember the story I told you, the story of the Buddha when he left his, palace of luxury and lived, an ascetic lifestyle. What was he doing? He was trying things out. And then when he finally realized the truth and became awakened, that's essentially, this resonates with me.
Mm.
So we'll move on to discuss Mahayana. Well, one thing with what Don said about Hinayana, narrow vehicle, and it can be seen as pejorative. That's definitely can sound that way. The intent of the word is that it's narrow from the sense you've got a narrow focus. You're focusing on your mind right now. The shamatha meditation, which is a Hinayana practice, is universal among all Buddhists. So it's not like this is bad or this is, everybody does it, but it can sound, when you say that word narrow, it's narrow in focus in that you're focusing on your mind, but it's not narrow in terms of being stupid or idiotic or anything like that. That's not at all what that means. So in Mahayana, that's called the wider vehicle. And there's more, we're not gonna have time to get into all of them, but these are the primary two. And with this wider vehicle, we're now opening up to practices of compassion, of interdependence, of interbeing. And we're beginning to work with our minds in a context of everybody, of all sentient beings. So the practice moves to a wider perspective, saying, not I'm seeking to become awakened or enlightened, but what I'm now saying is my awakening is completely and totally tied to yours. We're all in this together. We're all interconnected. So there's no way that I could be awakened unless all beings are awakened. There's and Don could probably talk about this a lot more intelligently than I could, but in Japanese Buddhism, there's something called a koan, Koan, I believe. And it's basically a little saying that's a twist. And one of them is there is always going to be suffering. I will work to alleviate all suffering. So you see how that's almost like it just plays with your mind.
It's like tikkun olam.
What's that?
It's like tikkun olam in Jewish thought. It is that there are always cracks in the world, and you're not responsible for fixing all the cracks, but you can't ignore them either. I think I screwed that up.
It's like a mending of.
Men,
Men call it
were,
a mend, but they're all cracked.
it's, work on where you are
Yeah,
and your local, think globally, act locally.
bingo. And that's a great way of talking about what Mahayana is all about. I never thought of it that way, but that's a great Mahayana slogan. So we're not looking so much for personal enlightenment, but the fact that we're interconnected, interdependent. A great teacher, you probably have heard the name Thich Nhat Hanh, talks about, he actually invented a verb to interbe. Yeah. Now, my loving husband grammarian probably is like, but that was the way he had to invent that, because there's no English word to really say that. We interbe with one another. We inter-are with one another. And he's brilliant. I recommend any book that he's ever written. So the idea is, why they call it a wider vehicle, it's expansive. We're now saying we're not looking just for our own awakening, but the awakening of all sentient beings everywhere. And the path to that is compassion practice, empathy, that very thing that some people in our society are trying to get us not to do. Why? Because if we have empathy, that means we care for other people, and we cannot do actions that harm other people or impede their vitality, their life. And so, for many people in positions of power, that's a big no-no. There's something, some circle, and I think this is also Thich Nhat Hanh. He talks about engaged Buddhism.
Yeah.
So engaged Buddhism means it's not just, we're on a cushion or we're in a little sangha or something like that. We're in the world. The world is our practice. And that's where we truly meditate. There's something, Pema Chodron, another person you may have heard of, talks about on the spot meditation. And that's basically just you're walking around and all of a sudden maybe you see somebody in trouble. Of course, do what you can to help them. But in addition to that, on the spot, meditate and do something like Tonglen, which we're going to do in a few minutes. Just a quick, remember I talked about that difference between stimulus and response and that gap? This is what we do with that gap, is we practice compassion. So, as part of moving into the Mahayana path, there's another vow that we take called the Bodhisattva vow. And I talked a little bit about what a Bodhisattva was a couple of weeks ago, but in essence, a Bodhisattva is just an awakened being. In some Buddhist cultures, there's more of a religious significance to it. But in the West, we mainly see that as these are examples of truly enlightened beings that are full of compassion and full of various traits that help everybody achieve awakening. So, different from the refuge vow, where we say, and this is a quote actually from something called the Lojong slogans, which there's 59 of them. No, I'm not going to do them. But part of one of them just says, when we take refuge vow, we vow to take refuge in the Buddha as an example of how to open and let go, the Dharma, Buddha's teachings, as instructions on how to do this, and the Sangha, the community of people who are also on the path. And when we take the Bodhisattva vow, then on top of that, we vow to awaken in order to help others do the same. So it's, the overall theme is just basically to expand compassion to all beings to the limits of space and time. Talk about overachievers. So that is in essence the Mahayana path. Now, Tonglen, the meditation practice we're about to do, I want to give you a few minutes on what that is what's called a compassion practice. It's different from what we did last week, because last week we focused on our mind, what's going on in our mind, our breath, focusing on that. Now the object of our meditation is broader. It starts with ourself, because we never abandon Hinayana. But then it goes on to progressively expansive groups of people. We're going to meditate on 5 categories. First, ourselves, then a loved one or a person that we care deeply about. Then we're going to move to what's called like a neutral person, somebody who is just someone we know, the person we see every week at the grocery store, school crossing guard, whoever. Then we move to a group of people that maybe you feel strongly about. Maybe the Palestinians in Gaza, or maybe the people that have been deported to El Salvador, or maybe people who are hungry. Focus on them. And then finally, we'll do all sentient beings. We expand out to all conscious beings everywhere. So the way we do this is we use the breath again, but in a different way. So in the in breath, we breathe in pain. We breathe in the suffering. This isn't masochism. This is empathy at work. This is building that empathy muscle. So we breathe in and take in that suffering that we know they're going through. And then we breathe out the wish that they be free of that suffering. And that, whatever it is that's causing them pain, is alleviated. So we first do that with ourselves. We breathe in our own pain, what we're feeling, and then we breathe out the wish that we could be free of that pain. Then we breathe in the same for our loved one and breathe out. So we'll do that for about 10 minutes. Before I begin, I'll open the shrine as I did last time. And I want to ask, the person who is allergic to meditation isn't here today, but is there anybody who is allergic incense? Oh boy. Well, that's that's a whole different issue. Is there anybody here who's bothered by incense and would rather I not light it?
What scent is?
I forget. It's a Japanese word, and I don't remember, but it's nice, and it's a light scent. It's not overpowering, not like liturgical incense.
It is a problem, but we were going to have to leave any Mother's Day, so
Oh, okay.
we're not leaving because of that.
Well, I don't have to light it if it'll.
Oh, no, we're gonna be leaving any, so go right ahead.
Okay. So we'll start with the incense, and then and then also, you've got these handout at the end of our session, at the end of our dialogue, after meditation. The last thing we do will be to close with the dedication of merit. I mentioned this to you earlier as well. And this is something that will at first really rub Lutherans the wrong way. But it really, what Buddhists mean by merit is a very different thing. What we're talking about is in our practice, in our discussion here, in our meditation, we accumulate benefit. Maybe that's another way of putting it.
Yeah, much better.
And what we would say is then that we're dedicating whatever good came out of this, we're dedicating to all sentient beings. And again, another Mahayana practice. So we'll close with that. And this is a very traditional one. It's used all throughout the world.
Question before you go on.
Uh-huh.
What's the meaning of samsara or SAMSARA?
Samsara is basically best translated as suffering, as a discordant, neurotic mind. Where we're caught in never-ending cycles of dysfunction, of causing ourselves or others pain. That's the kind of we could go on for a whole hour from that, but yes. Yeah, because we're all interconnected. someone could cause you pain, you could cause someone else pain, you can cause yourself pain, that other person could cause themselves pain. You know, that's cyclical samsara, and that's what awakenment brings us. So, like last week, if you're able, please stand. Yes, we have. And then when I sit down, that's your signal. So. Okay, to begin, we'll do a minute of shamatha, just following the breath. Just breathe in, breathe out. If you find your mind distracted, just say, "Oh, I was thinking," and then return to the breath. Now let us focus on ourselves. Breathe in whatever is painful, whatever is causing you discomfort, physical, mental, spiritual. And then in the out breath, breathe out the desire to be free of that, to be rid of whatever it is that's bothering you. Breathe in the pain, breathe out the wish to be alleviated from that pain. Now shift your focus to someone you deeply care about, a loved one, a good friend, a family member. Breathe in whatever troubles them, whatever causes them pain and suffering, and then breathe out the wish that they be free from that suffering. Now think of a neutral person, someone who you just see every now and then again. Imagine what they may have the suffering in their lives. Breathe it in, feel it, and then breathe out compassion for that person. Now turn your mind to a group of people that you know are suffering, a specific community of folks, someone who, a group of people who are facing horrible challenges. Breathe in the suffering of all those people. And then breathe out that wish that they be free from that suffering. Breathe it out to the core of your being. And now expand your awareness to all sentient beings everywhere, all people, all animals, all life. Breathe in the collective suffering that is their reality, and breathe out compassion, empathy, and the wish that they be free of that suffering. Now let us return back to shamatha, to our basic practice to end. Just breathe in and breathe out. No thinking now. If you do find your mind wandering and discursive, just say thinking and gently return to the breath. Don't beat yourself up. This is the practice. Just return to the breath. Thank you for meditating with us. So what was Tonglen like for you? What were your feelings, thoughts about that practice? Very different than what we did last week.
Breathing and suffering was an interesting way of dealing with how I otherwise deal with suffering. So it's just
This is I mentioned last time, shamatha is exercising that muscle of awareness. This is exercising the muscle of compassion.
Is there a further medication then that would take the compassion from just wishing for it to being an agent to do something for it?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
exactly right.
Yeah, that's engaged Buddhism, what we just talked about. That's taking the meditation off the cushion and your life being the practice. So absolutely.
So engaged Buddhism goes even farther. Uh, person I know who was deeply associated with it in Thailand is Sulak Sivaraksa. And he said he learned this from the Christians, and that is politically, socially engaged Buddhism.
Mhm.
Uh, that to witness and to live it out, to try and confront and overcome injustice, social, economic, and political injustice. And so in Thailand, uh, there are base communities. They were developed originally in Latin America, where the community itself uh, has a sense of solidarity and commonality in witnessing to the need for justice. And that now this is what Christians and Buddhists in Thailand are doing conjointly. Uh, Sulak uh, organizes protests against the corruption that's very endemic in Thailand. The wealthy and the military, and unfortunately now the new king, are all in cahoots in maintaining power and wealth. And he organizes protests, nonviolent protests. And as a result, he gets sent into exile. He's either put in prison or he's sent into exile. And then his friends petition for him to be released or be able to be brought back. And as our group, it was a strange group of Lutherans and Buddhists dealing with uh, uh, health issues. And anyway, as we were heading back out of Bangkok, the news was he was coming back in, and sure enough, the traffic is on the left. The right-hand lane of traffic was completely empty. It stopped all traffic. And as we were moving, suddenly there was a fleet of police vehicles with a solitary taxi in the middle. And the next time we met at the Society for Buddhist Christian Studies, he was there. And I told him about that, what I had noted. I said, my guess was you were the taxi. He said, oh, yes, they had a little reception committee. So it's that next step that some of these Buddhists are now taking, rather than just doing like the typical Lutheran pattern was the equivalent of Lutheran social services. But the need is, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer expressed, you have to go beyond social services to engage with the powers that be in your own nonviolent but committed way. And so that's part of that cross fertilization that's taking place. And Thich Nhat Hanh and other monks in Vietnam did this. So he was Thich Nhat Hanh was persona non grata with the military dictatorship that the Americans installed in South Vietnam. But the communists equally didn't want him around because he wanted true justice. So he lived in exile in France at a community near Plum Village. So that is, again, this interesting, as I call it, others call it, cross fertilization between Christians and Buddha, saying for one another.
I don't want to cut things short, but we're a little over time. So what I'd like to do is to close with the dedication of merit. Typically, it is chanted. I think this week we'll just say it. Maybe next week we'll see if we want to dive in and chant a little bit, but we'll just close with these words if we all say them out loud together. By this merit, may all be honored. May it be brought from the stormy waves of earth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of darkness, may our free will be. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully see you next week.
So much.